Welcome back to part 2 of Summoning Insight this week. As I said in the other VOD, in case you're just catching this one on YouTube, we're trying a little bit experiment where we kind of have each of the guests in their own YouTube segments to make it easier for you guys to find exactly what you want to watch. If you want the whole VOD, you can go to Twitch. It's still going to be in one piece. So let us know what you think, if you like it, etc. So joining us.
Also, now that LEC's been in like World's Finals, one MSI, like they've all now put it in their contracts that they won't be at the little kids table with NA anymore. So we had to separate them up. And obviously, Youngbuck here, he's been in finals, he's been in Worlds, he's done it all. So listen, he was not going to put himself on a show with someone like DeMonte. Like you've got to get to his level first before you can do something like that.
That's right. In a way, think about Summoning Insight as now independent shows based around each various region. So we've really diversified the way that Summoning Insight can work every week, getting on various guests. Usually, because of time zones, it's going to be LCS and LEC. Those are the easiest guests to get on live when we do the show because it's like 3 a.m. in Asia when we do it. But we will still get on those guests as they are relevant, probably heading into playoffs. So, Youngbuck, first off, coming up from we have some interesting topics of conversation because we did have a chat with Whippo, your former top laner from Fnatic, who was comparing your Mythy styles last week, and I do want to get into that as a follow-up to the last episode. But also, I want to get your take on Super Weeks, because we're going to be coming up into another LEC Super Week, which, in my experience as a coach within League of Legends, are the absolute worst. So how are your thoughts on Super Weeks right now? It's a new thing that LEC is doing so far this split.
Well, the main thing about the Super Weeks is that there's way more volatility. There's just a way bigger chance to lose to teams you shouldn't lose to. So maybe I should welcome it more now that I'm more in the middle of a packed team, because we have a G2 Fnatic Origin on the schedule. It doesn't hurt to have some more volatility. It's harder to prepare for individual teams, but as a coach, it is indeed quite the nightmare, because preparing for 3 teams in the time span of 4 to 5 days is pretty difficult. And most of the time you usually prepare for the first game, then see what the opponents do and make some small adjustments to what you've been wanting to do already on the second day. But most of the prep goes into the first day. The second day you adapt a little bit, but now you have 3 days. So basically, I think we have G2 in the last day. We're not really going to prepare for that. We're just going to see what they do on the Saturday and the Friday, and then adapt to that. And that brings a lot of volatility. Maybe they play Sona Lux, maybe they don't. Maybe they have other different strategies that we are completely not prepared for, or maybe they play exactly what our opponents play, and it's really easy for us. But yeah, it's way more volatile. So generally speaking, not a lot of fun.
So wait a minute, you've got OG, Fnatic, G2. Well, at least for you, you've just got a bunch of the middle of the table teams and not the best ones. So you just have to sort of practice against a bunch of average teams in LEC, you know.
I did appreciate
how things change.
I did appreciate that narrative that the LEC was pushing on broadcast. They're like, oh, and Excel is still in the run for playoffs. Their schedule, and they were trying like, oh, it looks strong, but is it strong, right? Because of the way that those teams have recently been performing, everything does seem a little bit topsy-turvy in the LEC right now. Has it felt that way to you in terms of everyone beating everybody else? Obviously, even Mad Lions being taken down a couple pegs the last few weeks. What is going on in the region overall? Do you think that the teams have gotten better, worse overall? Why has that happened?
I think overall a little bit worse. From our perspective, or at least from my perspective, there isn't a single team that I fear. Where even last year when we were in Fnatic, we had a lot of respect and a little bit of fear for G2. And even when in 2018 in Fnatic, we had a lot of respect for teams like Schalke at the time, sometimes for G2 as well in the spring. And now there isn't really a team where we're like, holy shit, man, that's going to be a really rough game. It just feels like you can beat everyone on any given day. And I think there has a lot to do with the downfall of Fnatic and G2. Not to take away from Mad Lions and Rogue, but I think especially G2's downfall is very it's very unpredictable. It probably has a lot to do with Perks's personal issues that had him on the sidelines for a bit, so that's really sad. But just in general, yeah, the teams are way closer. But I would say that at Worlds, we wouldn't do as well as we would in the last 2 years, based on what I've seen right now.
So no, I mean, that's a pretty high bar because Europe made the grand finals both of those times, right? So how much of a drop off are you saying then? Because not saying that they're not going to do as well isn't a huge indictment if the answer is still, oh, we'd get 1 or 2 teams into the semifinals probably.
I think that if G2, Fnatic, Mad Lions, and Rogue, which are kind of like always in the topic for Worlds, if they make it, I would put my money on G2 or Fnatic making a deeper run than Mad Lions or Rogue. And I wouldn't be surprised if that's either quarters or semifinals, but I wouldn't really put high expectations on making the finals again.
Seems reasonable.
Actually, one thing I wanted to ask you about in that regard is when we've talked to a lot, it's actually mainly the NA teams I notice, because NA was always just fucking team fighting anyway. They didn't even know what a 1-3-1 was, except when Suzuki went there, right? They've obviously had to settle with the fact that with like the Dragon meta now, it's just all fights around that and then the Herald basically. Like, so in this world, do you think, is that something that's cost Europe as well? That you can't have like for example, G2's creativity, you can't even do half the shit they did last year. Teams like OG, you can't even 1-3-1 the way they wanted to. But like, I feel like the fact that the game's a bit more streamlined, has that hurt Europe?
I think it has hurt G2. I see them as a team that indeed works a lot of creativity. I think for a team like Fnatic, it shouldn't hurt that much because they've always been a very bot lane focused team where every resource goes into bot lane from draft to the Nexus exploding. So that shouldn't have been a really big deal. And for Mad Lions and Rogue, I think Rogue is a team that plays really well, that does capitalize really well around the Dragon and the Herald meta. So
seems like the meta helps them, right?
Yeah, absolutely. They're really good at playing around those objectives. So yeah, there is some less creativity there. It's more about team fighting, and I think 2018 Worlds, like the knockout stage, is where the creativity really started to go to the maximum, because until then it was also all team fighting for basically the last 7 years. And 2019 was definitely the year of creativity. So seeing that being toned down that much it definitely hurts G2, and then of course by proxy Europe as a region.
It's also interesting to me that we've seen, I would say, at the start of the split, we saw kind of a mirror of LCS where teams like that were very heavy in early aggression and skirmishing, like Mad Lions and C9, both started very strong. But as the split has kind of worn on, we've seen teams like Team Liquid and Rogue, who are more focused around scaling and control mages, really start to shine as potentially the best teams in those regions. What's your experience of coaching the meta right now when it comes to which style do you think is superior at the current point in time?
Well, it feels like right now there's about 7 or 8 teams in the LEC that if they get a 2,000 gold lead in the first 10 minutes, they'll close out the game pretty cleanly. That it's almost it's a done deal. So stylistically, I think strong early game compositions, but also of course with a mixture of team fighting, is just by far the best. And I think like control mages like Orianna, they're not weak early. Then control mages like Syndra, Azir, they can actually contest prio in a lot of lanes and often get it against other champions like Twisted Fate, which isn't that good at team fighting, but it's more than 1-3-1 and early advantages. So I don't think Rogue playing, for example, Orianna or Syndra or Azir means that they're more late game focused. I just think that this is the meta for EU.
Also brilliant champions to control those dragon fights.
Yeah, for sure. I wanted to talk a little bit about the start of this year for you, because you have a really good reputation as a coach in League of Legends overall. And so it was kind of surprising at the start of the year when you left Fnatic and it seemed like XL was not the most likely place you would have ended up. I was surprised you didn't end up in LCS, quite candidly. What was your time like when you were leaving Fnatic, and what were you considering in terms of offers or opportunities for yourself?
So I had, I think in total about 5 offers, 2 in the LCS, 2 in the LEC, and 1 in China.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, the Chinese one was it was nuts, but I just at that point, at this point in my life, I'm 28. Well, I'm 29 now actually. I don't want to go for the money now. If I was younger, I maybe would have gone there for a year or 2 and just cashed in.
Turned out this was the year to skip going to China anyway, Youngbuck. I think I'll doubt you on that one.
That, usually the players do the opposite thing, right? They don't take the money early and then they retire to LCS later on for the money, right?
Oh, the money would have been great. I just don't want to see the depressing image of Youngbuck being welded into a LAN center and then just going, oh, well, see if he's all right in a few months.
Sure. Yeah, the thing is, I'm in the part of life where it's also time to settle down a bit. I have a girlfriend, a long-term girlfriend, so got an apartment, and so it was basically Europe or North America. And basically the timeline forced me to decide quite early for XL. The other team, their offer was on the very low end in terms of the salary. The roster wasn't very promising to me, so I was like, it's probably not going to be it. And then at that time, it was between the North American team and the XL, but the North American team was a little bit slow. XL put out a really, really fair offer. I'm not complaining here. And also I got to work with Expect again. I talked to Expect a lot about how the organization is, how the living circumstances are in the gaming house, how the players are. So that kind of really reeled me into Excel. That's why I had a deadline as to when I had to say yes or no to Excel so they could move on or not. And I wasn't really hearing back in time. And then after I signed with Excel, another big NA team came and said, "Hey man, are you interested?" And I'm like, "Nah, sorry, I'm already gone."
When you say there that the salary offer from the other team wasn't that great, that's one thing I wanted to ask you about. I mean, in your position, you are one of the most decorated coaches in the history of League of Legends because of the international results as well, right? Based on my knowledge of the teams in League of Legends, the salary for even the best coaches is so far behind the star players, it is ridiculous. Like, what do you think of this? Because to me, it reminds me of when coaching as a role first came into existence and everyone said, well, why would I pay a lot of money? There are no good coaches. And it's like, well, yeah, but you got to have the money to get the people who are going to become the good coach. So I feel like at this point in history, the Western regions, especially where all the franchise and the money, the salary's kind of out of whack. Like, I'll just say outright, I basically heard until this recent signing that like Grabs and G2 wasn't making that much either. Someone else has won all these championships and stacked loads of accomplishments. So are the biggest coaches far from the star players in terms of salary from your perspective?
I can comfortably say I was earning the least in G2 and in Fnatic in those 4 years, by a relatively wide margin. Maybe Expect came close because he came in as a sixth man player, but even he was making, I think, a little bit more than I was. And yeah, I didn't make a lot of money in G2 or Fnatic salary wise. It wasn't that bad because of all the prize money and the bonuses that got. So I, in the end, nothing to complain about. But in terms of like salary, it's not that easy as a coach. Sometimes there are rumors about the North American salaries, and it makes me a little bit jealous. But it's getting there. It's getting better. I'm quite comfortable in Excel, I have to say.
It's interesting to hear you say that Expect was a big part of the reason that you wanted to join this roster, because he's no longer with the team. What was the transition like away from Mickey and Expect and then bringing in Cries and Special?
It was already around week 6, 7 of the spring split. We just knew it wasn't working out very well. Expect had very low confidence and very small champion pool because of the confidence issues. And also them not being fluent in English caused issues on the Rift and even in the reviews and in the presentations, like macro presentations. So at the end of the split, it was a pretty clear deal that we had to get English-speaking players. And yeah, there wasn't basically a single person, I think, in the organization and the players and the staff that was against it. It was really clear we need English-speaking players. This lineup isn't getting any better. We're not going to do better in spring if we stay together. The morale was getting lower and lower. Things were getting worse and worse. So we just said, okay, we need to make changes here, and no matter what, even if we have to upgrade our academy players, we already see that as a big upgrade that we are going to go through with this.
Do you think that as a coach that we've seen, generally speaking, a move away from Korean imports in LEC over the last few years and prioritization of a lot of the Academy or EU Masters players? Is this a trend that's going to continue because of the reasons that you're stating in terms of difficulty of communication and also what seems to be a wealth of talent that have you guys have been able to pull from?
Yeah, this is definitely going to continue. I would be very surprised if there's a new Korean import coming in the next few years. I think we still have Tricks and Dreams, Trick and Dreams, and I think they're going to be the last ones, and there won't be any new Korean players. And I also think as league progresses and coaches get better, they'll want to work with English players. That was my personal lesson: is if you're confident in your ability to coach, work with people that A, can understand you, and B, are very hungry, and then that the rest will fall into place.
And I think if you look at this split alone with Mad Lions and Rogue, like, it's not even like it's unjustified. Unless you literally could get, it'd have to be the best Koreans at this point. You'd have to literally be bringing Chovy and Deft and these Showmaker and Shy. Unless it's that level of player, what's the point in doing it? Like, someone like Larson was there last year and like the fucking Academy level.
I mean, Shadow existed.
And is way cheaper, and is way cheaper than these players are. So at this point in time, like I say, unless you were going to do like in the past Team Liquid's tried to, where you basically just try to sign Faker, It's not even worth trying to get the import at this point. Like, the downside's too much. We've got too much talent. Especially because, as I say, the talent doesn't just become LEC level. It becomes the best in the world now. Like players like Larson, players like Kazi, Shadow. These look like some of the best players in the world. Forget like regions, just the world.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I also think
nothing, I guess.
I also think that it's very difficult. You're not always going to get the player that is going to be all in terms of learning English. Part of Huni's value, to his credit, as a Korean player in the West, has been that he doubled down and became totally fluent in English. And that motivation and that natural ability to learn a language.
Just from talking to 7 different teams. Oh, sorry. Keep going.
That's right. Had to constantly be renegotiating those deals.
Exactly. Yeah.
He really had to learn English so that he could make sure that his contracts were bulletproof.
His first language is actually legalese, and then he speaks a little bit of English on the side.
But yeah, I do think it's rare, and it would be rare going the reverse direction too, right? It would be rare for a Western player to be able to go to a place like Korea or China. I want to double back on that Chinese offer. Were you seriously considering that at any point in time? Because that sounds, as we've seen now with Yamato Cannon going over to Sandbox in Korea, and also what's his name, the T1 analyst who is European. I forgot his name, but it just seems like we're seeing more coaching opportunities from the West into the Asian countries at this point in time, which has never really happened before.
I was, and that was mostly because of the money, and that the roster that they told me they could get was going to be pretty solid. Like the names they had were very solid players. And so already after my 2 years in G2, I kind of at that time wanted to go to NA to make a lot of money because I didn't make much in G2. I was a new coach. It wasn't that big of a deal. And then in Fnatic, salary-wise, it wasn't that much either. It was mostly the prizes and the bonuses, the boni. And then this Chinese team comes and says, if there is any problem related to money, then there is no problem. That's literally what I was told. So it's like,
by the way, that's an amazing tagline for the movie poster. If there's any problems with money, there are no problems.
LPL.
Yeah.
That's amazing. That's actually sick.
Yeah, so,
it's true. They have figured out ways for the LPL to pay people, because if you guys don't know, one of the big problems in China is getting money out of China, right? It's you can get paid a metric fuckload of money, but if you don't have any way to get it out of a Chinese bank account and you don't plan on living in China forever, you're kind of shit out of luck. If
people don't know, it's the reason why people like Imp basically made it clear, like, I'm just going to play here forever, literally. Because first of all, I get paid megabucks while I'm here, and I only have the megabucks while I'm here. The angle I heard basically was that the only way you can sort of get around it is maybe you can convince them to buy a house in Korea or something.
So what happens?
But even then, you're not going to get it all out.
This is legit what happens, and I'm not fucking with you guys. A lot of the Korean players are paid in apartments and coffee shops in Korea. So what happens is that their deal is that when they make money, that businesses or buildings or apartments will be purchased for them and then transferred into their name in Korea. So that's actually a thing that happens, which is smart for the players because they get business that presumably kind of operate themselves or real estate that they can rent out. But that is part of the workaround.
I'd rather just have the money in a big bag with a dollar sign on personally, but that's just me. And keep the coffee shop.
The stories back in the day were that they paid in suitcases. They would just, especially for Korean players, they would just give them a few suitcases full of money and fly them back to their home country.
So
so that did actually happen.
So the other thing that happened was, this was years ago, guys. So I don't think this is happening anymore. But
maybe I'll start doing that. Maybe I'll start getting paid in coffee shops. So that could actually might actually be better than the money, if I'm being honest.
All I'm going to say is, you live in Amsterdam, and coffee shops are way more fun in Amsterdam overall, right? So if you had to pay me in coffee
Listen,
shops, I would want them
we
in
got-
Amsterdam.
In Amsterdam, we got that shit that makes you think Broxer should be signed to Team Liquid. We got that shit, man. You put it on another planet. You try some of this space cake, baby.
So, but
Too soon.
one of the aspects of those old deals that's so funny is that, so the other thing that used to happen in China, and I haven't heard of this happening in years, was that that you wouldn't get paid at all, either because they couldn't pay you. They couldn't pay you from to your foreign bank account or whatever. So some Chinese lands many years ago got a reputation of not paying out prize money. So the result of this was that in order to continue to have pro players from many different esports come and compete in China, they would literally pay the prize pool in cash. And so there are stories of people having to go through airports with tens of thousands of dollars in Chinese currency and like try and explain that or like get it through customs.
You know, the best part of that course, by the way, is when you say try to explain it, people are thinking, yeah, well, you just explain, you know, this is something. No, it'd be worse, won't it? We're talking about when people don't know that esports is a thing and you're like, why do you have this enormous suitcase full of money? I'm the best at this video game. It's like really old one. Like, what? That's going to sound like the shittest alibi of all time. You're going in the little room for sure.
Yes, you are definitely going in the room.
2 hours with no drink, and then that guy comes in with a suit and start. You go, fuck you know, get me out. I have my call, like no call, like oh Jesus.
By the way, I'm not going to get specific on this, but there are some really funny stories about this entire scenario that someday will come out as part of a book, or we'll have, you know, part of the wild esports days where people are just traveling around with enormous amounts of currency because China gives it to them. Very funny.
Let's pivot back to LEC.
Yes, let's get back on track here.
Let's talk about XL, because the problem is, like, Youngbuck, I'll just be straight up with you, mate. I don't bullshit around. You know this. Like, even though you're in a playoff position at the moment, and even though in a minute when we talk about Fnatic, I'm in a meme like, haha, look, you're in the same position they are. Fuck them, blah blah blah, whatever. Nemesis sucks. Like, you're the usual. I've got it all in notes. Right. One thing I have to say though is, like, of all the teams that are in the playoffs right now, yours team is on paper the worst. Like, you've beaten all the bad teams basically. You haven't won many. You won the one against G2, fair enough, but you haven't won many games against the top teams. So right now, how would you make a case for XL? Like, are you going to be in the playoffs? Are you going to be doing some work in the playoffs? Where should we put you? What are reasonable expectations for now for XL?
Well, first of all, there's SK, which are a lot worse than we are, I think. But in terms of why we are going to make playoffs is that every team right now around us is burning, at least from what we can hear behind the scenes. And we are having the greatest time of our life, really. We go out kayaking every Wednesday. We have fun. We go 1-17 in scrims, and we're just going laughing on stage and going 2-0. So we're going to lose all our scrims this week as well, and we're just going to bang out against Origin and beat them. Because we do it on stage, and we just have a really good atmosphere in the team, and it clicks really well. And so we may not be the best individual players, but things are working. The ship is not burning. It's very much alive, and the teams around us are all crumbling.
The ship is.
See, that's the thing about Youngbuck, Monty, is he's one of those like common sense people. So you know that famous joke where, you know, man goes to the doctor and he says to the doctor, like, my arm hurts when I do that, and the doctor says, stop doing that. Then that's Youngbuck's approach. He goes, right, so we lost all the scrims, we won most of the games. You know what to do, because his players are like, how do we win the scrims? And they'll give us, don't get greedy, just lose the scrims, and we'll win all the stage games. Problem solved. 2 quick coming out.
I just like how the ship metaphor when they're literally going out kayaking. So this, can we break that down a little bit when you say the LEC is on fire? What the fuck does that mean? Because you just referenced a bunch of behind the scenes stories, and you don't have to tell them, but like, what does that mean when you say that?
There's a sense to the environment in that sense. Like, what's the issue?
Well, G2 Fnatic not being in the top 2, obviously it's that's not going to be a great fun behind the scenes. Origin not being in a playoffs position right now, there's not going to be a lot of fun in their locker room either. I know there's some fires here and there as well. I think Mad Lions and Rogue have their shit together, so there are teams that should be performing very well that are just not performing because the locker room isn't that great, the atmosphere is not good, and the results are showing for it.
Do you think that changed?
That Super Week at the end, right? In theory, every league's supposed to have one bottom feeder you're all allowed to beat, right? Schalke plays Fnatic and Mad Lions in that Super Week, and I bet their butt cheeks are going to be permanently glued together. Like, who the fuck wants to play that team right now? That's the ultimate banana skin team.
Yeah, I mean, we also thought it was a free win last week, and yeah, they made it really hard. It was a really hurtful loss.
There's another thing I never saw happening. I never saw Golden Glue going from one team getting fired, getting into a better team, Hooney just returning again after doing nothing for years. One thing I definitely never saw is fucking Gilius riding in like Gandalf the White in
This is my favorite,
Two
dude.
Powers or some shit and just rolling up. And actually, no joke, posting score lines that you would think if I took the nameplate off was like Blabber or something like, this is fucking bonkers. What is this?
This is the best
Is reality
timeline.
a meme? Is 2020 a meme? Is that it? So the king of memes, this is his realm, is it?
I fucking love what's going on with Gilius, because Gilius, I love his attitude and I love his trash talking, and I think he's such an incredible personality, but he never had the actual skills to back it up. And I just love the fact that we live in a world where he comes rolling in, not only, like you're saying, putting up these incredible score lines, but having legit mega clutch Baron steals, just, having these incredible star moments. And not only that, but sure, there's an outside chance that Schalke gets into the playoffs, right? But I just love the fact that he's just ruining everybody else's chances. Like, he's just fucking up the entire leaderboard right now.
That's
It's
what makes
beautiful.
it even worse. Dude, in LEC, think about it. It's not good for anyone. If you're the top teams, it's like, right, even Schalke and the bottom teams are starting to come for you and winning games against you. The mid-table is just a bloodbath, like the fucking Somme or something. Everyone's just dead. Like, no one wins that. And then at the top, like, they're the most inexperienced teams, so even they're not, like, super confident. They're like, 11-4 record. Yeah, this should work out. Like, those teams are ready to just collapse instantly. So I can sort of see what he means. It just looks like a train wreck across the board.
I think the World War I reference is actually very astute, because the whole thing about World War I was it was this war that was fought partially mechanized, but you could never actually advance because there weren't cars or anything. So no one could ever advance beyond the railheads, but you had planes and everything like that capable of fighting. So it just ended up with no one ever moving anywhere, and in a giant bloody stalemate, which is where it kind of seems like we're at right now, because the middle of the pack in LEC is just it's seemingly entrenched right around that 50% win mark. And it's very difficult to see who is going to get into the playoffs after next week, especially. And here's the other thing, by the way, guys, that really bothers me. Okay, we have super weeks. Why would you have a super week in the last week of the season? This is,
you know, the reason why.
This is
like
where you don't want variance.
They wanted it to be like this. They wanted it to be that Schalke still had a chance to get in, and that the team, everyone has a chance to come first. They wanted that, obviously.
Okay,
come on. Cynical, isn't it?
I did see, by the way, that the commissioner of the LEC, literally in his statement on why they didn't want best of threes, did cite one of the reasons as upsets being exciting, which has always been a Riot take, by the way. So he cites that as a reason not to do best of threes, which obviously I don't like very much. But I do think that if you're going to have super weeks, you don't do it at the end of the season, because when everything is so close right now, you're basically introducing even more variance into a potential playoffs and Worlds run.
The fact that Worlds comes from the playoffs as well, it's like, come on, man, can we at least have a break in that regard? What about if we talk with some of the other teams, like Youngbuck? Let's do the Fnatic talk, because for me, what makes it interesting is everyone, literally everyone I've talked to on shows, because there's 4 slots for Europe for Worlds, so it's not like 3 even, and there's no gauntlet, you just make it through playoffs. Every single person I've talked to on shows, even with the losses Fnatic's had, always picks Fnatic as one of the 4, even if it's the 4th one. Right? At the moment, dude, there's a world they might not actually make the playoffs. That is a real thing right now. It's a possibility Fnatic might not even make the playoffs. What do you think of what's going on with Fnatic at the moment?
I mean, I have too much respect and information on them to actually talk about it. To talk about what's actually going on.
Come on.
But they will make playoffs. They will make Worlds. I mean, I have respect for the people that work there. I'm not gonna like air dirty laundry or what's going on.
No one's asking you
Obviously,
to do that. You can, like the rest of us, theorize on it or give us some unique insight into Fnatic.
What do you see in the server? What was wrong in the server? How about that?
I mean, sorry, can you repeat that, Thorin?
What's actually going on in the server that's going wrong then? Because pretty soon, when I described it there, I wasn't even overplaying it. They really are. Like, the losing record, tied with your team, barely in the playoffs. I'll even throw in, if they didn't get that miracle Misfits win the other week, they wouldn't even be in the playoffs right now. Like, what do you think inside the server's going wrong?
Drafting is always very difficult in Fnatic. There's just very different stylistic approaches, how people want to play, very aggressive, passive, team fighting, winning lanes, snowballing. Champion pools are in certain positions quite limited, and then you have to match with other roles, and it just becomes a nightmare. Last year there was a scapegoat. I don't know who the scapegoat this year is. It looks like it's going to be Hylissang. Last year, everything was on Broxa, so
It's Hylissang and Whipple this year, it looks like.
That's not as a big surprise that those are the targets now. That was kind of
Fortunately,
predictable.
yeah.
Yeah, very unfortunate. Yeah, it's just the same shit, different year, basically.
I think we can read a lot into that. Thank you. One thing that was discussed last week when we had Whipple on that I thought was really interesting, and one of the reasons why I wanted to get you on this week was him talking about the differences between you and Mithy as coaches. And he wasn't making any kind of judgment on which was better, but he did say that you were very interested in looking at kind of the overall global meta and deciding champions or team compositions or strategies, and then trying to implement those strategies into the team and kind of mold the players into the most effective meta, which is certainly a manner of thinking about the game. Do you agree with that assessment? Or
put it this way, just because I remember like specifically how he phrased it, he described it as though like you would give people like a choice of what champion they could pick, whereas Mithy was more like, what do you want to play? And then he would try and integrate that. Like he tried to contrast it that way, if it makes sense.
The way I would describe it is that I was very well aware of the strengths and weaknesses of my players, and would avoid certain champions for specific players, and knew that certain players had to fulfill specific roles. I think it's still relatively similar this year. For example, you cannot put people on a mage or a carry champion. He can play them. It's just you're not gonna kill the enemy nexus. It's just not gonna work. He's proficient on those champions. He needs to play something that supports the other lanes and is very sufficient on his own. I think people doesn't know how much we as a coaching staff thought about the drafts in terms of like, you know what, this might be meta, but we really should not be playing this. We should be playing this, or if we do play it, we need to really have this in our team. Other than that, I was quite team-oriented, team strategy oriented, and not so much in the individual coaching. So for me, strong team fighting was always just also really.
Never goes out of fashion, does it?
Yeah, it's very old-fashioned. Yeah, if you have the best players in the region, you might as well just draft equal or better team fighting and then always win in the mid to late game. That was kind of the strategy until somewhere halfway through 2019.
I also
see, Monty, this is why Youngbuck's one of my favorite coaches. He's one of the only coaches who doesn't end every anecdote with, well, I thought it was the wrong pick, but he wanted to pick LeBlanc, so I let him. But in game 5 of the world, you know, that's what every other coach I do. They always make it sound like you don't even have any controls. The coach is like, well, he decided what he's picking. It's like, you're his boss, literally. Like, so I actually like that Youngbuck understands. It's like, sir, I think I'm going to pick this. You're not. Like, you can't play that, actually. Here's what you can pick. Sometimes some players need to be told that. There's a lot of people wouldn't believe how many players in esports who are really good players, by the way, and sometimes very smart players as well. But the problem is they're good and smart at certain things or about certain parts of the game, but they have blind spots in their own game. And they will actively try and play a style or a champion or in a team even that just doesn't make any sense for them at all. And they might, and listen, a lot of them are young guys, might be inexperienced. It will take them a lot longer than someone who's an outsider to ever figure that out, because there's a million reasons your brain can come up with as to why this happened or that happened. So I actually think that's a mad underrated skill as a coach, the ability to basically tell players what not to play. There's plenty of people who play whatever you want. Like, oh, you like this player, play whatever, yeah.
I also pointed out to Bwippo that you were coaching him at a point in his career when he was significantly less experienced. And so the proper take at that time might have been to coach him into a different kind of style. And now that he's more versatile, like more experienced players can be trusted to give you more nuanced or varied feedback once they've kind of gone through a variety of metas, learned how to play many champions at the professional level, and that timing was probably also part of the reason why you were coaching him in a specific way, right? Do you so the question is, do you tailor your approach to the players that you have? Because let's say we take a look at Excel this year, for example, and you start with Expect, right? Now you have Cries. There must be a difference in the way with their level of experience that you are tailoring your coaching to these two different top laners, right?
Absolutely, yeah. We've been only playing carry champions, or at least high damage champions. I guess there's not tanks so far. And we know that Patrick is our main carry, so we try to make sure we're in a position where either he has a strong matchup, or we have a strong mid-jungle 2v2, or a strong mid-jungle support 3v3, or we have a top laner that can impact the bot lane like a Gangplank. Like, we know that this is the way we win, and that's why we adjust the champions to that. And you have to do that. And in Fnatic, that was a very simple strategy. It was always playing for the bot lane. It's worked for the first 7-8 years of League of Legends, and to this day, it's still the most efficient strategy. So it's really easy to just make that happen.
What about your bot lane right now? Because Patrick has been one of the
arguably the best part of the team.
Yeah, your star player. You say you're playing around him right now. How are you approaching this team, considering Patrick has been one of the constants in terms of performance in 2020?
I think it's very similar to my approach to Fnatic now. We started off the split with like very heavy carry top lane champions and trying to be really versatile, having strong 1-3-1. And that was basically partly because of the trauma we had in the spring split, where we would always overgroup and lose every team fight and couldn't really play the side lanes well. But we also realized that we're playing the game on hard mode in summer, just playing Vladimir into Gangplank and then the Gangplank being more useful. So now we're the ones playing the Gangplank and just in the top lane, and we played Wukong, we played Cannon, I think. Just more teamfight oriented champions that are still strong in the lane, because we think Kryze is a really good laner, so we want to have him on good matchups, but just fitting more towards the bot lane, not needing too many resources. Some resources are always fine, but just playing League of Legends the way it's been done, and I think it just really works well in the system and the macro coaching that I do, that playing through your bot lane as your strongest lane is just the easiest way to win League of Legends.
Even, I mean, in the current meta, it seems like that's certainly true, right? With the strength of the AD carries and the strength of team fightings and playing around objectives, generally speaking. Do you think that has the Dragon Soul caused you to reconsider the game? Because one of the topics we were discussing with Damonte earlier was how important the soul is. Is the game too binary at the current point in time, where you are kind of forced to team fight and split pushing is a less viable strategy than it has been in the past? Because the way you have to play split pushing comps is way more error free than it ever has had to have been previously, right? Because one mistake means that the enemy team gets Soul or Baron and then the game is over.
Yeah, I think for the spectators, it's a lot more fun, but you have to draft early game now. It's almost impossible to draft a scaling 1-3-1, for example. A change that I personally would really love is to bring back tower gold again, from like more gold, especially on tier 2 towers, because I thought that was a really beautiful element of the game to rotate perfectly for tier 2 towers. So that is kind of useless now. It's kind of out of the game. It's almost pointless to actually set up good rotations for that. Yeah, the dragons. If you fall behind 2,000 gold, the enemy will have a Dragon Soul at 20 to 25 minutes. If it's an Infernal or an Ocean, the game is over. So that's a little bit binary, and you have to get a little bit lucky with the Ocean Soul or like the Infernal Soul if you're on the winning end. So I would remove some strength from the Drakes and give it back to towers. I thought that was a more beautiful element of the game, but yeah, I'm just one guy in the puddle of rioters wanting to make it fun for the spectators, and that's definitely in their right.
It does feel like the emphasis on making the professional game as similar to the solo queue experience as possible is detrimental to the number of possible overall strategies, because it feels like Riot's focus has been they want from at every level of solo queue the players to know how important it is to fight around a specific objective, and Dragon Soul has accomplished that extremely well, I think, in terms of making the game, like narrowing the focus of the game for your average League of Legends player. But the unfortunate result of that is the professional game doesn't have the same level of macro strategic diversity that it used to have. And I also think a part of that has been it's switched the importance onto lane matchups have become extremely important. Itemization has become extremely important because, as we were discussing with Damonte as well, late game now starts at 2 items. So if you don't have the right 2 items, then you're in deep shit, basically. And having the exact proper items, considering you won't have 4 items or 5 items to kind of balance it out in the late game anymore, or have kind of a broader base of items to work on, that becomes really significant in the way that the game plays out.
Yeah, absolutely.
I've got a question for you. Is there like a simple tweak that you could make to the soul effect? Like maybe it should be like, I'll give a ridiculous example. Maybe it should be like the quad damage in Quake or something, but it only has a certain time. And maybe in this case, it'd be 2 minutes or something. And it'd be like having like a power play. So you get the soul, but you got the power play. And after 2 minutes, if you haven't won the game off it, you have to fight for the next dragon, and then whoever gets that one gets the next. Would you rather some dynamic like that? Because I agree with you. Even though I know Riot invented these mechanics to end the game, to be a win condition, to me it's too clear cut. That's what I've basically been trying to argue. Is like it feels like the game is just going to end. It's incredibly hard to fight back at that point.
I think it's okay for there to be a mechanic in the game. Like if you get 4 dragons, you basically win the game. The tweaks that I think the best one is that right now, if there is an infernal spawning, that is harder to take because you can't even trade an objective for it. If the 4th Drake is spawning, you can't say, I'll just take the Baron. No, because the Drake is down in 10 seconds. You have to be set up, you have to be ready, and you have to put everything on the line right there. You can't do anything else because you're not going to get a trade for it. So that's the thing they could do. They could just make the spawn timers back to 6 minutes instead of 5. Make it harder to take in the early game. Yeah, but just give it a little bit more health in the early game or a little bit more damage. But I think especially like if you are 3 Drakes behind, then you have to be there on the forefront of the game is over, and that's kind of I think that is a bad design because you can't even choose to trade it for the Baron because by the time the Dragon is down, they're also at the Baron already. Like you don't have the Baron, it's like 20% down, so it's just too easy to take it.
It would be interesting if the Soul Dragon was more difficult, like a Baron level encounter, an Elder Dragon level
like it has
encounter.
extra resistances or something. Yeah, something cool like that. I think that would be a good idea.
Yeah, I do think the timed buff is interesting as well. From just having a power play window like the Baron, because I appreciate that Riot did try and create a cross map objective in the Herald, and then try and say, okay, are you going for gold? Because gold is obviously the immediate benefit in the game because you can buy the items instantly, right? From taking plates or from using the Herald to take down turrets and plates. And then, but the problem is that the other side is the stacking objective where you get less immediate benefit, but you put immense pressure on the game state, right? And so I appreciate the fact that they tried to do that, but it does seem that past a certain point that gold, it doesn't have the same effect, especially if you can't snowball it by, as you say, taking a tier 2 tower and getting more gold from it as a result. And it's also hard
to his point about the dragons being too easy to knock down. It doesn't help that like half the top laners are carry top laners, and then you've got a fucking farmed carry jungler. Like, no wonder that shit's going down instantly. It's not like season 5 where the guys like are fucking hitting him with like a fucking Dr. Mundos. So like one cleaver from that doesn't do much, does it?
Yeah, I think.
I think
what was your point?
Nice.
What'd you say?
I think.
What were you saying?
I think having the Herald and the Drake and having the option and really trying to focus on gold or having the stacking objective, that's actually a really nice element. I have to agree there. The Herald has been a really fresh breath of air, and having 2 is even better to just speed up the games.
So what do you think about, let's talk about some of the other teams in the LEC right now, because we haven't talked about Rogue at all, but Rogue has been one of the better teams in the second part of summer, obviously in first place at the moment, and they were kind of ignored for a lot of the time because Mad Lions had this much more, I would say, exciting and flashy play style compared to Rogue being more slow, more steady, more built around.
It's weird that, isn't it?
Larson.
How stories repeat over history. You know, you have the one team that's dominant, right? And you're listening, they've got this like mid laner that's like fucking sick. He's like really aggressive, leads the team, like a charismatic guy. Then you have this other team who's sort of competing with them, right? But they're more of like the like slower style. They just play boring, like Orion, like control mage in the middle. The storylines never repeat in Europe or anything like Youngbucks. I thought I heard this one before. Weird. Weird how that one works. Yeah.
So what are your thoughts on Rogue right now as a team? Do you consider them the favorites for the summer split title as it stands if you were going to play playoffs today? Because a lot of people, I think, when we've discussed it in the past, believe that they are more one-dimensional, potentially, less capable of winning the playoffs over a series of best of 5s.
Only good at winning in League of Legends. I'm just trying to find other weird ways that people can downplay them while explaining that they're the best team. Like, fair enough, okay. Can only win games in 2020 this year. the weirdest downplays I've ever heard, but fair enough. Everyone. But it's weird. Do you think, Youngbuck, like, basically the real problem is this. Even though the record they have is amazing and the number of teams they've beaten is very impressive, basically what he's saying there is true. Everyone almost gives them like backhanded compliments.
Yes.
They never seem to properly get the credit as like they're the best. Everyone's like reserved on them a little bit. So do you share that? Are you a little bit skeptical of Rogue despite the record?
I'm a little bit skeptical of everyone because like I mentioned earlier, it feels like you can defeat anyone on any given day. I think Rogue is it's not exciting, but it is good gameplay. They do the same thing every game. They had 7 minutes, they push out the bot lane or the jungler, they go top lane, take the Herald. If you match them, they push out the lane, go back bot lane, and if you match them, they go back to push out the lane, go top lane until you stop matching them. Then they put down the Herald and have a 2,000 gold lead. It's the same thing every game, but they also get it done. So I think it's easier to prepare for because all you need is a strong bot lane 2v2 with a strong jungle matchup, and you can probably stop it. And they're not that exciting in terms of like they team fight a lot, like, or have creative picks. They just play good League of Legends. Larson might be the best mid laner in Europe right now, if not the best, then the second best. So and just overall individual really good players, but other than Larson, I don't think they have one that's like, yeah, this guy is absolutely the best in their role. Whereas with Mad Lions, you feel a little bit more of that fear. I feel like Shadow has a really strange season. Like, he's the only guy that keeps pulling off Lee Sin. Almost no one wants it in their team, but if you play against Mad Lions, you're like, maybe we should consider banning it. Even though usually the joke is, enemies pick Lee Sin. That's a nice game. It's going to be an easy one. They're just more exciting, I think, a little bit more diverse, and they win through fighting, and that's usually a little bit more intimidating because it feels like it's easy to stop teams that have a specific macro move, and just trying to stop that than fighting, like winning against a team that's really good at team fighting. That just feels like you're always punching up against a wall.
And they are basically locked right now for playoffs. Both them and Mad Lions, I believe, are completely locked because the worst they could end is 11-7. So yes, they're definitely going to be playoff teams so far. Do you think that Mad Lions or Rogue are going to take it a little bit easier this week heading into playoffs? Do you think that's going to introduce even more variance into the Super Week, considering that they may not want to show strategies before they try for a playoff run?
Well, one thing I have to ask, actually, maybe Youngbuck can clarify this. There is that weird angle, though, where it's like the first split added points as to how the seeding works. So in theory, they, like, for example, like Rogue, especially, who obviously didn't have a great spring split, they should still be trying to win 3-0, obviously. But how does that work, Youngbuck? Do you remember?
I think it's a really big deal to finish first in the summer because it, based on the points, it almost guarantees that if you are first in the playoff seeding, you are basically in Worlds.
Right.
I don't know if you're 100% in it or like if you can lose 2 or 3 best of 5s. So I think both teams will have to give 100%. I am, of course, a little bit fearful that on the last day they might start trolling against a team that we are facing against if they have locked in that spot. But I think they have to go 100% because that first place position is too valuable right now.
So the way, just to be clear for everybody, the way that this works in Europe is that it is based off of championship points still, unlike LCS, which is purely about summer playoffs. And the way it works is the top 6 teams are going to go into the playoffs, but it's based off of their championship points, right? And championship points were given for the conclusion of the spring playoffs, right? So you got a certain number of points for how you finish. So, for example, G2 and Fnatic got the highest number of points. G2 got 90 points, right, for winning. Now, the points are now given for the end of the regular season in summer. So whoever wins summer regular season before we hit playoffs is going to get 140 points, so 50 more points. So it's very heavily weighted towards the summer split, regular split performance, which I don't like this system for a lot of reasons. But the main reason I don't like it is because whenever you conceive a format, you have to ask yourself the fundamental question, which is, what am I testing in this format? And so what frustrates me is in spring, we were testing what is your performance in a best of 5, double elimination. And in summer, you're testing what is your performance in a round robin, best of 1 with 2 super weeks, right? So in spring, I'm saying, how prepared are you for a specific opponent on a given week, and how deep is your strategy, your playbook for a best of 5? Whereas in the last stage of this week, I'm testing what is your generic strategy that can beat 3 different teams where you're not specifically prepping for an opponent in a best of 1 with no adaptation possibilities. So I have a fundamental problem with the format because I feel like you're testing 2 different things, which I don't like when I design formats myself. But also, like you're saying, it is hugely important to win in that first place because you get 50 more points than G2 did for winning in the playoff bracket in spring. So it does make a big difference. Now,
if Fnatic or G2 makes playoffs, they also get the advantage of having the points from before. So it means their seed doesn't even have to be as good.
Correct. So there is that aspect of it as well. Now, to make Worlds, if you are, so the way it works in Europe is the top 4 teams are seeded into a winner's bracket semifinal, whereas the bottom 2 teams, seeds 5 and 6, are automatically seeded into loser's bracket. So what effectively this does, everybody, is it gives you an extra life if you are seed 1 through 4. You can lose 2 best of 5s before you are eliminated from the playoffs, where if you're seeds 5 and 6, you can only lose 1 best of 5 before you're eliminated from the playoffs. So it does make it easier if you are seeded 1 through 4 to make the top 4 position. But even
as Youngbuck said, he is correct. I've just looked. Because they do the lower bracket in the playoffs based on your seed. If you're the number 1 seed, you're just at Worlds. Worst case scenario, you're the 4th seed.
No, you could lose. You could lose immediately a couple times and then be knocked out.
That makes sense, mate. Think about it, right? Go look at the playoff bracket.
Yeah.
And number 1 seed plays number 3 or number 4, right?
Oh, I see what you're saying. Yes.
So if you lose that, you minimum go to the 4th.
That's actually crazy.
Yeah, it is. Well, if you're number 1 seed, you make Worlds no matter what.
Huh. You are correct. That is another very bizarre flaw in the format, because there's a world here where G2, because they have 90 points already, based on an old meta, could still take the number 1 seed if they finish high enough, but not first place, in which case you are correct that 2 teams would be eliminated before them, meaning you automatically get to Worlds, because
that makes me think they didn't think that part through, because that sounds like they designed the format before they gave Europe the extra 4th slot or something.
They probably did.
This looks perfect. Even number 1 seed has to at least win 1 best of 5. But the idea that like you just by winning a bunch of best of 1s, basically you automatically could get into Worlds is like, I'm a bit off with that. Like, you got to win at least 1 best of 5, surely. Come on.
Wasn't it similar and different in last year's, where if you were top 2 in the regular split, you would kind of be in Worlds, or am I?
I think from championship probably would be. Yeah, you're probably right.
Yeah, okay, it was probably with the championship.
Similar scenario, though. I agree. You could also do it without necessarily having much accomplishments. Yeah.
Yeah, I do think you were right though, Thorin, that this was probably designed before they knew they had the 4th seed. That seems reasonable, but it also seems likely that they would have gotten the 4th seed. Like, you have to assume that you would receive that 4th seed because you were in the last 2 World Championship finals, right? And you won MSI. So there would be no reason to believe that you weren't one of the major regions getting a 4th seed. Sure. If anything, it would have been outrageous for them not to have gotten that 4th seed, right? So I think that was a pretty safe assumption overall, even if it hadn't been completely officially and totally decided. But yeah, I think this format is really, it's a very weird hybrid format that I'm not I'm not a fan of the LCS style either, which brings 8 teams into the playoffs. Like, you shouldn't have a chance at Worlds the condition for going to Worlds shouldn't be I'm not the bottom 20% of teams in the league.
I've got a good topic
kind of ridiculous.
Here's a good one, right? So one of the things on all the talk shows that I've been doing, Youngbuck, is whenever everyone has this discussion like I referred to, of like Mad Lions and Rogue are the top teams, but everyone deep down still thinks G2 and Fnatic are going to get in the playoffs and then probably cause trouble and maybe even win and go to Worlds and be the best team still because the rosters still have really good players on them, right? Part of that is the old school thinking that has always applied in League of Legends of, until you see someone win in the playoffs, you can't believe in them because lots of people just mentally collapse in the playoffs. And then secondly, there's a way of playing playoff games traditionally in League of Legends that is different from best of ones, where typically, I mean, Team Liquid the last few years is the best example. You just play for scaling, you play your comfort picks, you don't take loads of risky moves, and you probably win the best of 5 because the other team's less experienced than you. It's hard to play best of 5s if you've never played them before. I actually think some of that probably, even though people are going to apply that to Rogue and Mad Lions now, I'm not sure it should actually apply though, mate, because with the way the game is played right now, like we've been talking about, the more streamlined format of the game, the fact that there aren't any like 40-minute late game scaling, like these things don't exist. I don't know if a lot of those like old advantages that used to have been a player for, I don't know if they apply as much now. Like if I think of this Rogue squad, if the game that we play in the playoffs is the game that we're playing today, I would easily see them winning best of 5s against some of the other teams. Like they would just do what they do now in a bunch of games. I even think with how insanely draft dependent some of the games were, like say like a month ago, that in itself means that you can't just draft the safe things in the same way. Like the draft is a war zone at the moment after the first picks and bans. So what do you think of this? Like, do you have a different perspective? Do you still think the old teams have the advantage? What do you think?
I mean, I'm still on the G2 bandwagon when it comes to best of fives and playoffs, and even for Fnatic, I think it's a team that does pretty well in best of fives if the first game goes well. And having that veteranship, it is a big deal. I definitely see your point. It's very easy to just have a 2,000 gold lead, and then it doesn't matter how experienced you are or how much pressure there is on you. So that is definitely part of the meta. So there is probably less necessity of that veteranship. But are all those players in Mad Lions and Rogue, are they willing to also pull the trigger in a really big best of 5 against G2? Because in a best of 1, I think so far they are, but can they do that on stage as well? Maybe in the studio, maybe in front of a crowd. God knows. I would still put my money on G2, honestly.
Do you know if you guys are playing LAN or online for playoffs? Has that been announced yet?
No, we don't know. Riot, I know Riot is trying to get us in a LAN in the studio or somewhere else. I think they're trying the studio, but it's just legalities are an issue. So they just conform to the law, and it's not been on the good side yet.
Yeah, I was just curious because it seems like things are more under control in Germany, and having an audience-less LAN might be a possibility for you guys.
I'm going to guess it won't happen, being as like ESL Cologne is just going to be an online tournament apparently, and won't be an actual LAN in CS:GO. So I'm guessing if it's the same country, it probably hasn't cleaned up enough yet.
I think the difference is, at least with ESL 1 Cologne, you'd have to fly people in from different countries, whereas everyone is in Berlin right now already for LEC. So that might be a bit of a difference, right? Not bringing people from outside of the city or outside of Germany. There might be some subtle differences, but I have no idea what's going on over there. So just a thought. I would, obviously being on LAN is better, but I think that goes back to the conversation of that is where the veteran performance really shines, right? Because last split, we saw Mad Lions play a crazy scrim game against G2 in the first round of playoffs and end up winning that best of 5.
There's one thing I hadn't thought about that actually would suck, is if Worlds is the first real LAN of 2020, like it doesn't matter how good these players were. If you're going to send like Mad Lions, who've never ever played a playoff series as this 5-man lineup as on LAN, if you're going to send them to Worlds, it's harder to feel as confident in like Europe's representation if those teams go. So, I mean, it's just unfortunately the way it is.
Yeah, I think it's going to have a really big impact on their performance, and it's why I would always take G2 or Fnatic, especially at Worlds. If there's teams that are going to perform, it's the ones with the veterans in it that have been there, because doing well at Worlds, it takes some veteranship and some experience. There are a few things that you kind of have to go through a couple of times, or sometimes only once, or need teammates that know how things work. And yeah, so for a team like Mad Lions and Rogue to go on a big stage against FunPlus in the group stage games, I don't see it happening right now.
It does seem like it would add significant variance to Worlds results also, and especially among expectations of many of these rosters with young rookies, because this has been a year of a lot of new talent rising to the top, especially in Europe, and not having that experience does seem like it could be very detrimental to Europe's results as a region, especially if you don't send a veteran team like G2, who obviously you can never count out and would still be the safe bet, I think, in the playoffs if they make it, which after a 2-0 week looks like they're kind of getting back on track now.
I think they're relatively safe, and they have the easiest schedule, I think, of just about any team, like in terms of standings. I think they play Misfits and Vitality, and then they have us on the last day. So they have one guaranteed loss, but at least they have Misfits and Vitality.
They play SK and Misfits, and then you guys.
Yes.
But yes, it does seem like they have a significantly easier schedule than some of the other teams that are fighting in. Your schedule seems potentially challenging, but as we discussed earlier, but well, I'm going to take a look at some of these other ones.
Do you know yet? Like, listen, I know obviously because there's so many teams. Like, obviously, like 7th place is 6 wins and 3rd is 8. So I'm sure like there's a million possibilities as to what is the rough thing for your team at Youngbuck? Like, do you have to win? What's the number you have to win to be safe or whatever?
So either we win one more game than SK does because we have the head-to-head, or we just keep Misfits and Origin beneath us. They're one game behind us right now, or Vitality, but Vitality I think has to win 2 more games because we have the head-to-head as well. We play Origin on the first day, so basically if we beat them, it's a 99% done deal. Unless Misfits manages to win two more games than we do, or like 1 more game than we do. But if we have that win on Friday, then it's basically done and dusted.
Do you take any special satisfaction in this split? I mean, listen, at the beginning of the year, some people thought maybe you're some super coach, you'll do something with XL, but pretty much everyone was out on you this split, mate. No one would have said, like, if I'd have asked people 3 weeks ago, does XL make playoffs? I'm pretty sure everyone would say no.
Yeah, I think this has been a really, really good split. As well as the coach, I think I've developed a lot and proven more than I did last split. Last split, I thought we had a roster that should easily make playoffs, and man, we bombed. Like, it was 7th place, but it wasn't a good kind of 7th place. And now we've already matched the same amount of wins as last split. We're still in it until the very last week, and I actually think we have a really solid chance at making it as well. So, yeah, I'm personally very satisfied with this split.
It does seem like when we head into this last week as well that one of the exciting things we can look at is Schalke, because they get to play both Fnatic and Mad Lions in addition to Vitality, which is the less important game.
If they can make it through off this week, they fucking deserve to go to the playoffs. Look at that
yeah, they have a chance. What I love about this week for Schalke is they have a chance both to prove that they are legit, right, and to play for potentially their playoff life on the line, and because they can still either maybe ruin Mad Lions' chances at first place. They could potentially knock Fnatic out of the playoffs. There's a lot that could be going on. To close out this show, let's talk about Schalke for a minute, because they have had a stronger performance, and they did take the win against you this last week. So what do you think about Schalke, and how have they improved from such a disastrous start to summer?
I think Ilias is we've mentioned before, he's the big game changer, because in Schalke, I didn't feel like there was someone that was proactively getting them leads and doing things around the map. They were just slowly bleeding, or things would happen at random, whereas Gilius is making shit happen, and so far it's all going the right way. So he's made a really big change, I think, for that team, because other than that, they were just slowly bleeding and bleeding out, and if they didn't have like a much stronger team fight composition, they were just going to lose. And they still kind of lean on having really strong team fights, but at least now they have the Gilius factor.
That's still wild that is a sentence that can be said in the year 2020. Did you see this team as a threat beforehand? Because it's surprising to me that they were one jungler away from going 4-0 in the last 2 weeks, right? That just one change being what they needed to take out some of the top teams in the league is somewhat surprising to me.
No, we kind of counted it as a free win, really, and for XL to do that, that's not easy, because we're a middle of the pack team. So we thought that Schalke wasn't going to be a big threat. We just figured that if Abadagi isn't playing Azir or Orianna, then we will win the game no matter what. And well, boy, that didn't turn out so well.
All right, do you have any final thoughts here, Youngbuck? Any pressing LEC conversational topics that you'd like to touch on as we end the show?
No, nothing.
Nothing. Okay. Well, thank you. Thank you for your time. Again, guys, we've split this episode up. So if you're on YouTube, go look for the other part with Demonte if you're interested in the LCS conversation. Or don't. That's your choice now. We're not shoving LCS down your throat. We have carved off the good stuff into this episode, and we have contained everything else in the other episode. So thank you very much for joining us. We'll see you guys after the Super Week next week, where I'm sure we'll be talking about all the playoffs to come around the world. So thanks a lot, and we'll see you then.